Welcome to the inaugural Fix My Backtest with Mark Anderson. Mark, how you doing?
Pretty good. I'm ready to get an insight into how people are testing Zero DT because I'm in a little bit of an echo chamber. I'm not super active on Discord.
I love it. Well, listen, as is my custom, I force all of my guests to listen to songs I've created. So we'll start the show now here.
You got a feeling in your gut, a vision in your head. You think you found the strategy to keep you in the black, not red. You ran a little back test, and the line went to the moon. You're picking out a Lambo, you'll be quitting very soon. But wait, is that a fluke? Did you get juked? Did your dreams of mansions die and your money get cooked? So stop the guess and stop the stress and put it to the test with the 0-day mark. Who's better than the rest? Every Tuesday morning, 10:30 is the time to see if your good idea is actually worth a dime. It's option Omega. Bridge the gap, find the edge, and step away from the financial margin call edge.
I'm always proud of it. That's the most I can do. So construction background, bringing it all together, happy to do it. But we're going to jump right in because this is a serious show about fixing stuff. So Mark, I sent you 2 tests. Paul was the first person to reach out on Discord. And so you've got them, and I'm going to let you just start driving. So how the show will work, everybody, is we'll look at some tests. We'll probably look at like 2 max a week, just from time standpoint, because we want to spend time on them. And then we will go from there. So Mark, you take it away. I'm going to share your screen, and we'll talk through some stuff. There it is. Oh, I can't hear you, Mark. Oh, sorry. You're muted. There you go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right.
So this was the first one we got. Can you guys see my screen?
I can see it.
Okay, perfect. So some things I want to look at with this is I'll kind of start with, I guess, what is good about it so we can build on success a little bit. So, they used, looks like ChatGPT. So it seems that you're embracing innovation and such. And then we'll kind of get into it. So basically, like just off the start with a few things is I want to see that everything's congruent when I look through this. So first thing, if we go through this, is the logic behind trading. It's like you want to come from the right place. So the fact that I see this at 1222, 1253, 1256, 104, and 144, this already tells me with a person that's using a 35 wide spread is they're looking to just get like as leveraged as humanly possible because they're choosing late in the day and super wide spreads. So you can kind of see from the return on this isn't a super high expectancy back test that you would want to leverage. So all of this doesn't make any sense. And then it also kind of seems like you're really afraid of slippage and stop losses, but at the same time, you're using a stop loss. So just the overall organization of this is just pretty foreign in general. I like that you're not really trying to filter anything out. Also, like VIX Max 100, I think we may have gotten there for like a day in the midst of 2020. So like that's kind of irrelevant how we do that.
I think the reason they do that, I've seen those a lot. I think it's so that they can see VIX in the column, in the trade log column.
Yeah. So basically down here, they can see.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. And then blackout days, I'm just going to assume this is FOMC. So like that's in general fine, but I usually just keep them in there. So, I mean, I guess we'll just start with housekeeping on this. So in general, like slippage, you're choosing a $1.75 short strike. So that should be, 5 cents of slippage. And since it's a secondary leg, that should be 5 more cents of slippage. So I would say this should be 10 cents of slippage, and then crossing a $5 bid-ask spread on 2 legs. I would say this could be on the edge of generous. So I would personally like to beat it up to like 25 cents. And then also with the $5 stop loss, I really don't get why we're using $5. So if we just want to stack up like the maximal amount of expectancy over time, sure, if you lose $5, that's going to be the same amount, but you see you're very often going to collect 190 and 170, 150 and 190, 205 and 180. So even though your loss is the same, you have to understand that like when you're taking a $2 position and a $1.50 position, that's a different kind of like option Greek exposure on each side. So now you're fixing the stop loss for it being like 120% versus whatever. So, I mean, I don't think any of this is going to work, but if I wanted to change this, I would basically try to bump this out to 100 wide to make it more efficient. Then I would change the stop loss to percent of premium, which I would roughly say is like 150%. And then I would increase the entry slippage at 100 wide. I still think it's 10 cents, but I feel fine with 20. And then this would take forever to run the back test. So I'll just go last 30 days to look at it real quickly. But in general, like we're climbing up something that I just really don't think is going to work at all in general. So what I would really challenge people with this is like in terms of using ChatGPT, what's the logic behind there's an edge at trading these individual times, and by us taking 2 that are 3 minutes apart, like this is the definition of curve fitting, which is what is very, good practice in the trading community is we'll use a walk forward. So basically what that means is not every year you come forward and you pick the 10 best times. It basically means that you would take 2 years of data and leave the last 3 months that just occurred out of sample. And you would say, of those last 2 years, what like conglomerations of strategies was able to get closest to the return in those past 2 years for those 3 months that I've eliminated from my data set. So it's like completely different than an optimization of times in the past, because this is similar to saying Palantir has been going up. It's the best performing stock in the S&P 500. We should buy Palantir. Like that's not how volatility or options are made at all. And then you're just loading up a bunch of basically commissions and fees when you use a 35 wide, and you're looking at this $5 stop and you're crossing a relatively wide long leg bid-ask spread. So this is a great way to get the broker rich. And I would honestly say that like that 3% PCR is very generous in general. So, I'd be curious for the people that come on next week is like, what's the logic? Because the thing is, it's like, I'm open to not just beating up someone's back test if I can have a little bit of understanding of where they're coming from. So like we can always beat up slippage of where it's going, but it just sounds like, hey, these were the best times that ChatGPT said over these years. And it's like, that's a lot of noise and data. Like you can get a signal out of anything. You have a couple 100 minutes throughout the day. It does not mean anything that is material from what I see.
That's interesting. So a couple things with that. And I'm going to play the role of hopefully the community in this. And so, the logic of a back test, the logic of saying like, you're just picking random stuff, one could argue that's what a back test is. You're picking random stuff and seeing what works. With 0 day in particular, you're saying there is a logic to it. How does someone go to kind of uncover some of that, to get away from the randomness? If ChatGPT is not going to help you, how do you get away from some of the randomness to try to, or at least to try to parse the randomness and turn it into something that's valid?
Yeah. So the way I look at it is like, we want to kind of look at 4 quadrants of what we could do. One of them would basically be risk premium, or people would use the word edge. So we have to be able to theorize why something like this would work. And, other than leverage is cheap, so it's capital efficient, I can't really come up with any reason why this is any better than any other time, or we should be using a $5 stop instead of 150. We should be selling 175. I see really no logic in any of that. Then the next thing I would look at is like, what's our ability to protect against risk or offset drawdowns? And when we look at protecting against risk or offsetting drawdowns, you're using a really tight spread, which was 35 wide. And then in addition to that, you also are still using a stop loss. So you're getting really leveraged on a tight spread that protects you from risk. And then on top of that, you're paying like a huge amount of slippage and using a stop loss to protect you against from that. So this is basically like, if you don't want to take any risk, just own a treasury. It'd be similar to 100% exposure, your equity exposure. It will guarantee that you won't get any money. So we basically, like, the way I like to say it is like, you want to get paid for the risk you're taking and hedge away all the risk that you're not getting paid to take. So in this instance, when we're using that 35 wide, I'll pull it up here so you guys can reference it more. But when we look at this 35 wide here, basically, or remember this one's 50, it's the other one, but oops, I think it's this one. So when we look at this 35 wide, it's like you're not really getting paid for this $1.75 risk that you're taking here, because you're losing so much of the premium to that long leg, which is 25 to 30 to 35 cents. And then on top of that, you're paying a bunch of slippage to cross a vertical spread that's really close, and it's going to cost a lot of money. So when you get stopped out, you're crossing a $5 vertical spread through two legs. So you've not taken intelligent risk, and you've taken like the most expensive possible way to hedge away your risk also with that. And then the third thing I would talk about is like, you want to have a lot of frequency with what you're trading, which this does a decent job. But again, I'd rather trade it smaller and go through more times of the day. And then the other one would basically be like, is this something you could leverage? So if it's not that high expected value, you'd basically be able to make more money over time by leveraging it. And it's like, I think this one does fit that, but since the other three aspects are so poor, you don't want to leverage something that gives you a 2.9% yield. This is like spending money on your credit card. That yield's atrocious.
Two questions with that. Brandon, if you have a backtest that looks great and you leave out the 90 days for walk forward, wouldn't it still look good when you add it back in anyway?
Yes, but the point of the walk forward is that whatever the last 24 months was most closely matches kind of the 3-month out of sample ahead. So an example of this would be if someone is trading like a delta trade that does super well in high vol, that trade will make all of its money in April of 2025 or August of 2024. And then it'll basically muse along at basically null for a long period of time. So what most people will do is they'll just filter that out and say, I want to leverage up whenever high vol comes. But when you do that, you've opened yourself up to a bunch of sequence risk when high vol comes. And even though vol comes out, I know this is crazy to people, buy the dip, et cetera, there is going to be a period of time when the vol doesn't come out when it spikes up, and you'll get completely roasted over, and you would have sized up and you'll lose like 4 years of your gains. Whereas if you found something that's really solid, even if it doesn't do great in high vol, it doesn't do great in low vol, but it's always 6% PCR or 1.8 sharp throughout, very closely and within like 0.2 sharp points every quarter from the out of sample data, no matter what, that is something very compelling, because you're not going to be exposed to the sequence risk for fitting to whatever that past market environment is. And that's going to give you a high degree of conviction, because if we're using the analogy of playing darts, this is like aiming for that part on the top of the dartboard that is like a 20, and then you get 60 if you hit it in that little part. So if you miss, you're still hitting a 20. Whereas when people go for that high vol stuff, you're just going for a bullseye. And if you miss the bullseye to the left, you could get 4 points, and there's no multiplier if you don't get right on the bullseye. If you miss the bullseye to the top, you could get 20 points, and et cetera, et cetera. So basically, like, I'm always coming from the aspect, if we look back at that kind of core 4 thing, is it's like, if I can have a lot of frequency, I can explain the risk premium, and I know I can protect against my risk, I'll just add a bunch of leverage to it because option products are really good for that. And that's more the frame that I'm taking. But I would just challenge people that does the back test look good because it got all of its returns in a certain environment that did well? Or is this something where you can really project out what the return is? Because I think what a lot of people don't understand is like options are a risk transfer market, not a capital formation market. So when we're transferring risk to another party, to us, we have to have a high degree of certainty that we're going to be able to absorb that risk over a long period of time. Because if you go into the capital formation markets like equity and you buy Palantir, you can get unlimited upside. And whether you know it or not, your strategy is kind of this stock can go up forever and it can only go for zero. Well, with us, we could lose it all potentially at any point if something weird happens, 9/11, et cetera, et cetera. So we have to make sure like our risk budget is on point and we're getting paid every day. So we have that like catastrophic type bond insurance if something gets blown out, and it's going to be really hard to plan. And you're just going to jump from thing to thing if you can't build a, formula of how to go about that.
It makes total great analogy of the bullseye as well, especially for credit in general. That's and we'll look at DCs another week. We're starting out with some basic stuff right now, but one other question before we go on. If we keep this stop loss at $5 instead of 150% for the same back test, the MAR will turn to 52.9. May I ask what could be the reasons for that? I don't know exactly what they're talking about with the 52. That would depend on when you ran it and tests and all that stuff. But the theory holds, I guess, to say. But the MAR's great on it. Let's say we keep the thing at 5 instead of 150. The MAR would be great. Would you trust it then?
So my thing with that is if we look at the hierarchy of a back test, like the better the input, the more conviction I'll have in the back test, and the more different the inputs and outputs, the more I'll down market. So basically, like I like to say, you can only have 3 mechanics in a back test. That's basically an entry, an exit, and a risk budget. Anytime you add any more filters on top of that, your credibility goes down by half, in my opinion. So like if I have a back test that has no mechanics, I just enter it. It has no stop loss, no entry filter. It enters every day at the same time, no matter what. And that has a 5 MAR. And then I have something else that enters only 3 days a week, or I enter as a 20 delta and I use a $10 stop loss, something like that. I'm going even, and that one has a 3 MAR. I would actually take the 2 MAR because there's no variables that are inputted into that system that we depend on to get the result. So if you just buy and hold like a long option, you kind of know what you're going to get from that. And I'm going to discount anything that has stuff on it. Because again, I'm coming from the point of like what's most robust and I can trust on for a period of time because I want to get paid for the risk I'm taking and I want to hedge against the risk I'm not. So when you're using all of those filters, you're not using your money when the trade doesn't trigger. So you have a 0 sharp at that time. And then you're probably having to size up and your system's probably more fragile because you're dependent on certain past market environments, which may not be present on the future. So I would just say like apply a discount for whatever you're doing to it. And the reason I like a fixed stop loss here is because if you have 175 as a target credit and you have $5 as a fixed stop here, you're going to be managing at, this isn't really a big deal, but like just in general, I don't like the habit of it, is like you're going to be managing some trades at 125% stop. You're going to be managing some trades at 150 stop. You're going to be managing some trades at an 80 stop. And like, I don't think that's the intent of this stop loss. I think the intent was it tested better this way than it did with the fixed stop, so I'm going to use it. But if we think about it, it's like, well, was there just a really good market environment where you collected a little more or less? And is it just noise? In which case, why even have any noise in your back test that's potentially going to change the future returns? Instead, you could just have the same fixed multiple stop every time.
Yeah, makes total sense. Let's look at one more real quick, if we can. Yeah. Same by Paul. We'll get Paul since he was the first. He gets the first 2 today. Yeah. So, what are you looking at here? And what sticks out to you?
Yeah. So recency bias sticks out to me a lot here. In general, like this trade, we've chose again one time with this, which doesn't make a huge amount of sense to me. Again, with the $5 loss, we've popped out the wings a little bit. So, I mean, one thing, and then we also know like a good filter is just like VIX up or down. So like if I was going to trade this, I'd go VIX minimum overnight move up 0. I'd actually, change this to, we've done a flavor like this, but I'll change this to 30 wide. I'll remove the stop actually, so we don't pay the slippage. And then I would gladly add like 10, I'm just putting random time and we'll call it like 0945. So I would do something like that. And then we'll just go last year to make it. I imagine this will do decent since we saw it did well in 2025. But something like this, again, if you're going 50 wide, why are you using the stop? So one thing I actually do like here is I like the skew. You got 2.1 credit on one side and 1.65 credit on the other side. Oh my God, look at this. We'll be gazillionaires.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Save it.
Yeah. So one thing I like here is, risk premium is more on the put side than the call side. And you've kind of skewed it. Another thing I would do kind of really quickly with this is I would check, if we looked at just the put side, so you can remember this, actually let's check the EV here, 37%. So we can see how much is being driven by the put side. And I imagine, we'll see what it is. So 32 grand of selling put and call side. When we end up selling the put side, we make 16 grand. So this, another great find here. So this is completely delta neutral, which I think is really interesting. So you see we can make 16 grand on that side. When we go call, I think it was at 165 on this side. It should be kind of close to, may even be more because I think it was like 32 grand or whatever. But so I kind of like that because so this is pretty nice. So what you're looking to do is you're looking to make a delta neutral balance trade. And when you use, 210 and $1.65, it actually kind of makes it delta neutral, which I like.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty good way to go about something like that. I'll just go back to sell call. We can sell the put. But we did see that it didn't perform super well in the past a little bit. So I would, be a little hesitant to do something like this because it does have, more of a fat tail when we look at what that trade is, basically. But, this would not be a bad way to start out the day. You just, again, if we think about ability to offset risk, this has no stop. So like what's good about this is we can put it on frequently, half of all days because we have the VIX filter. We could do this. We can manage our risk decently. I mean, we can't manage our risk, but we know that the backtest is robust because it has no real stop mechanics. But since we can't offset risk, we can't trade this as big because if we hit a streak like this for a while and, just fun fact, I think like if we want to check this in 2024 or something, it probably won't do super hot. So this is something that I actually think is a good trade. Well, only 9 trades, so it wasn't that long. Oh, that's only January. So one thing with this is like, I think mentally this could be a really tough trade to stick with, even though it's good. However, it's really capital efficient. So if you want to sell 20 basis, maybe that's a little high, 10 to 15 basis points of your account in this every day, because you have a big account, you know that you may go 6 months without making money on this. But I do think it could be relatively robust. Okay, it looks like it worked in 2024. Okay, we got to test SPX dailies here.
Yeah, now you got to do the full. Yeah. What you said it's hard to stick with people. I mean, this is one of the number one things we see all the time. Why do you feel like this test would be hard to stick with?
So if we just look at it, your average winner is $281 and your max loser is, let's go average winner, average loser. So like you're looking at like a 1 to 5 win to loss ratio. And on average, this only triggers every other day. So for every loss, you have to go 10 market days of playing this, which is 2 weeks. So if you lose 2 in a row, you're guaranteed to be negative for at least a month. And also, I imagine the other thing that's going to be hard with this is like most people own equities. And I can almost guarantee you that when the market rips up, this is when you're going to lose on it because the call side. So you're going to be comparing yourself to equities. is when you're losing money. And then when the market sells off and you think you're diversified with options, you're also going to be losing money. So this is not that different from S&P, and you're taking a lot of stress basically with it. Could it be a decent overlay with S&P? Yeah, potentially. But you can see, we hit a peak in September and we're not back. So like very normal to go 3 months with effectively nothing going on. Here's a peak in March of 25. Looks like we surpassed that peak in July of 25. So, get used to these streaks. 6. And the thing is, I have people, so this one you went almost 6 months. And I have people, that follow my strategies that I post on my channel all the time. And it's like some people will start trading here.
Yep.
And then, and then they're like, I'm going to start a hedge fund. And other people will message me, start trading here and say, hey, none of your stuff works. How do you know how to trade?
Yeah, you suck.
Like, and I'm just like, and I did a video on this to where like I took this back test period from here to here and I ran the sample, and I took this back test period from here to here. And I took this back test period from like here to here, all the same size and all the same duration. And their correlation was like 0. And some had a negative sharp and some had a sharp of like 7. So this kind of comes back to this trade is 100% risk premium. There's no edge. Doesn't matter how many people start trading 0 DT. No one's going to arbitrage this away. This is just not a super appealing, path to hold for the labor and commission costs you pay. However, it has a valuable spot in our portfolio. Whereas if we think about this has 3 entry times. So this uses, let's just round it up to 10 grand. So, basically this returns 100% on capital a year, which is nice. You know what I'm saying? Like not something you want to lever up because again, you might as well stay on the S&P on leverage. But I don't think anything's wrong with putting this in here. And then, this credit type stuff, I think can be also a little dangerous because our wings will change. So like in really low vol, you could be taking on a lot more risk, and in really high vol, you may not be taking on as much risk. So that's something I would do to potentially robustness test it and kind of compare it to a walk forward, which in this case scenario, I would actually, probably like to put a fixed wing cost here or something, like a $2, $1. So I know what the risk is in between a little bit, and like a max cap on the child leg or whatever you guys call it. But that's just something that I'd look to, and then I brainstorm, okay, what do I think is more robust, even if one has a better expected value than the other.
That's good stuff. You'll have to watch. You'll have to everybody slow the video down and watch it again, because there's a lot in that 30 minutes we just did. One final question, just kind of a good question. What is a fat tail? Someone asked that. Yeah.
So in probabilities, if we look at like a log normal distribution, or I think it's called like a Brownian distribution or something, it's like a perfect bell curve. And basically what that is half of move, or 68% moves will be in between 1 standard deviation, 95% of moves will be in 2 standard deviations, 99.7% of moves will be in 3 standard deviations. And I may butcher the terminology or flip it around, but there's what's called a leptokurtic distribution. And basically what that means is there's far more moves in between 0 and half standard deviations, essentially what we're playing here. And there's many more moves in excess of 2 standard deviations, basically what we don't think is probable. So again, if we come back to the theory of why stuff works, it's like this is in line with how the equity markets behave, that we have a lot of moves inside half a standard deviation where you can make money selling vol. And then, we don't know what the distribution streaks look like, but generally we're going to have more moves in excess of 2 standard deviations. And since you're using, this 30 wide, like you could definitely get hit with a rough period of losing. And where's March of 25 in here? And this actually wasn't that bad because vol went up so much. But this is in line with the equity market behavior, because you are kind of protecting against a fat tail. Like you will take large losses, but you're not gonna, if you're trading this 100 wide, you could never lose 10 times more than you thought doing so. But that thought is in line because since you're not using a stop loss, you're using a close swing. Whereas if you used a stop loss, you want to see a good, high expected value. Like I would assume if you use a stop loss, this MAR would go up and the capture would go up. And I've tested these trades before. And like, what's interesting is using the stop loss did like super, super well in 2022 and 2023 and 2024, and like absolutely got destroyed in 2025. Like there were so many reversals and like quick vol spikes that like using a stop loss had way less expected value. So this is something where I'm actually looking at a trade like this with no stop compared to the stop loss and now walking everything forward. And I'm saying, okay, has my beliefs potentially changed on what I think is optimal based on how I know the equity market behaves? Because in October, some people took big slippage on stuff like this. And, the numbers are starting to point towards this is potentially the better trade, even though the MAR is lower. So, I'd like to theorize this in another half dozen ways to kind of get into that.
We'll talk more about next week because I have some questions and I think other people have, which is, we didn't get into it today because we could just talk about for 30 minutes without looking at tests. But, I think a lot of people who started, your analogy of where they started on the line, they looked at a back test with stop losses and they said to themselves, this protects against fat tails. And then you had something like stop again and, where some people got wrecked with stops, and we'll save it for next week. But the idea of like, when you're projecting a back test, how do you account for that? Something that's the unknown,
Yeah. So I think it all comes down to the quality of our question. So a stop loss is nothing but a risk mechanic. And what we want with risk mechanics is to protect against variance. So like a 20% drawdown would be a large variance. We don't want that. And, we're pretty confident that stop losses work. It's varied from brokers and, people using market orders and such. Like I didn't really get rolled over on stuff like this with how I manage stop losses, but like I'm open to the thought, and I will always do this to test it, is like by not using a stop, if it reduces the variance, like nice premium capture comparative to using a stop, like I would prefer not to use a stop because we're not using any exit mechanics. So even if the return is worse, but it's pretty close with no stop versus stop, I would like to use that because there's no difference in it. And if it reduces my variance, then I've managed my risks. So again, we have an entry mechanic, basically like a risk mechanic, which is generally going to be sizing, and then an exit mechanic, which can be a stop loss or lack thereof. So we're not curve fitting this. So I would hate this test. And this is slightly, and I'd also like to put out, it's like, we did slightly reduce the frequency with this VIX up and down, but we could go more into this isn't it? And, if we want to do this, but we know buying it works the other way. Yeah. So I'm kind of okay with this because if we're like, I would say if I'm running this trade, anyone who's running it, I'd say you're forced to buy it on the other side because now you're not curve fitting, you're getting the whole form of the distribution. But if we've seen the probabilities, like I think buying it has underperformed a little bit also this past year, which that risk transfer got to it. But like ultimately it's like we're just trying to fill in those three spots of like how do we enter, how do we size and or protect against a risk, and how do we exit, whether that's a stop loss or lack thereof. And the less variables that are into it, that's probably going to be the more robust form. Yeah. So like not very good, Not great. So some people could be afraid of this, but this is also another reason why, like, I would say, well, we shouldn't size this real large, because if something changes, like I wouldn't anticipate that 22% premium capture in one MAR, because we know this is what's on the other side of it.
That's right. Well, listen, that's good stuff. We'll be back next week. Mark's a busy guy, so I don't want to take his time up too much, but appreciate you guys joining for the inaugural show. We'll look at some more tests and continue to put them in the Discord. Even if we have a big backlog, we will get to them. So we're excited about it. But Mark, thanks so much for taking the time. And we guys will see you same time next week. So have a good rest of your trading day. See you guys in an hour. Navigation Trading Show. Talk to you soon. Bye.